Good morning. Well, welcome to Tao Talks, our first one, not only of 2020, but our first one of the decade. That's
Happy
pretty
New
great.
Year.
Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year 2020 and the new decade, new start, new beginnings.
That's right. Welcome to Tao Talks. My name is Adam Eichelberger. I'm the Director of Evangelization here at Assumption Church. And as always, I'm joined by our pastor, Friar Rick. Rick,
Yes.
I noticed you've got a lot of swag out today. You've got a lot of merch. I'm noticing a bit of a theme. Pete. Do you like Pete Buttigieg?
I love Pete Buttigieg. I do.
Wow, that's interesting. And
it's a bit of swag, yeah.
A bit of swag, promoting Mayor Pete, supporting Mayor Pete. And as you know, today we're talking about how to get along with and not kill your Republican or Democrat friend or family member. So we're talking politics.
Easier said than done.
Much easier said than done.
So, I mean, obviously, as a human being and as a person, I have my thoughts and opinions, which is always weird for a priest, and we don't think of priests as having that, but it is true, and there's always a fine line, because as a leader in the church, we're not supposed to promote any particular political party or political opinion or position. So, personally, I do like Mayor Pete. Some people say, how could you? He's pro-choice, he's this, he's that. I think he's a good candidate, and he's got my support. But really what I think is not important. That's just for me. As a parish priest, I have to put those things aside and say, I love Pete, but my identification is much more profound than that. It's the gospel and it's Jesus. So while I do endorse him and support him, as a Christian, I have to see beyond that. You and I probably end up differently on the spectrum, right? I mean,
a little bit, yeah. So if we're being totally transparent with everybody, my political leanings and Rick's maybe we're not as close as some people would think, but we do have a really good ability to have dialogue and be able to have conversations about things in news and politics and current events without trying to kill one another.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really important point. And like Rick said, we as members of the church are allowed to have our own thoughts and opinions about politics and where we lean on that spectrum. But it's really important that we find a way to be in community with one another and not let those things dictate how we treat one another. We just came off of the holiday season where, we kind of talked about it in our last video that maybe that can be a real pain point in some of the relationships that we have. So that's what we wanted to talk about today, is how can we talk about these kinds of things in the church, in our community, without wanting to kill one another.
Right, and the Catholic Church has a long history. For good or for bad, the Church obviously has a long history, but it also has well thought out understandings and philosophies and theology and ways of dealing with that. And people can be Catholic and have a diversity of opinions and a diversity of ways of implementing the gospel. In the past, in the United States specifically, I think a lot of people would have associated Catholics with Democrats. Mm-hmm. Today, it's about 50-50. And we have some tremendous resources and teaching. Certainly the church's social teachings are very clear. The priority of caring for the poor, caring for the earth, the value of subsidiarity, in other words, leaving things, allowing people at the grassroots to make decisions that impact them the most if they're able to make that decision. The implications for promoting the welfare and dignity of each person, the right to life from conception to natural death, and in between. Mm-hmm. That sometimes we forget about the in-between part. We can articulate our value system, and in the United States, the U.S. bishops put out Faithful Citizenship, which is kind of an overview that really tells us that there's, contrary to what some people might think, there is no one issue that predominates. Although this year the bishop said that the abortion issue is still kind of a priority for them, which rightly so. But the whole of the church's teaching reminds us that there is no one issue that dominates our ability or the way we make decisions. And I don't know, sometimes you're picking the worst of the best of a what's the expression?
Choosing the best of the worst, or choosing the lesser of two evils.
The lesser of two evils, and no one politician is perfect, and sometimes we have to work with politicians. When I was living in Toronto, one of the bishops there, one of the regional bishops, said to me, and to several priests, that it was important as pastors to reach out to politicians in our area when there's not a problem, when there's no crisis, and become friends. Because politicians are, first of all, people who, for the most part, are dedicated to public service. They're people who want to make a difference. They're people, I believe, of integrity for the most part. They have to grapple with a system that is very difficult. And if we, as people of faith and as church ministers, can befriend them when things are going okay, and we become a resource to them, then we can help guide them, I don't believe we elect public officials just to enact certain policies. We elect people who are going to think and make decisions based on their own moral code. So that's why I think it's important to be civil towards them, to respect them. I don't care where you stand on President Trump. He is the President of the United States, and he deserves the respect of his office, even if at times he's less than respectful himself. Every mayor, every governor, every president, every elected official who represents us deserves tremendous respect. And I think we don't want to demean ourselves by lessening that.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the really important things for us to remember when you talk about how we interact with public officials, especially the elected officials that we have, is that is a very Christian idea, the idea of accompaniment. That it can't just, the same way that we can't just look to God every time things are bad, we should be looking to God in all things, the good things, the bad things, the ordinary things. Mm-hmm. When we are in regular communication with the elected officials that we have, it creates a better relationship, and the dialogue is more open, and it allows change to be enacted more easily, instead of it always coming to somebody in a time of crisis, like when there's something bad that happens and shaking the doors down and saying, we want change now. None of that's bad, but in the interim, what are we doing to enact change on the ordinary level? I think that's a really important point.
Sure, and to praise and to thank our elected officials and to support them. When they do things that are good, to reach out and say, hey, I really appreciate what you did. Or I was at the airport. Some people know I volunteer at the airport here in Syracuse. I should say some Saturday mornings. Sometimes I don't have a chance to do it. But anyways, one time I was volunteering, and the mayor came through and was not in the priority lane, was not in first class, was not in TSA pre-check. He was just in the regular line with the members of our community. And I thought, well, he really has a humility and a great sense about him. And I was going to say, I didn't do it, but I should have said, hey, thank you for being so humble. We forget to do that. So I think it's important. Anyways, one of the things I want to talk about today, I'm really excited about, is the U.S. bishops have partnered with a group this year, starting in November, for this election cycle called Civilize It. And here's the logo. I printed it out. I don't know if you guys can see it.
And we can actually, if you want, I'm going to put the graphic up on the screen and other information in the notes underneath the video, so you can check out this website and all the information connected with it.
Yeah, it's basically a program or an effort to promote civility during this election year. Amazing,
Go
right?
figure, right?
And they have a pledge. So it says, this is kind of funny, it says, a divided country fights at the dinner table, political vitriol. What does it mean to love our neighbors in the midst of such a climate? Wow. So it talks about how, as Catholics, we have a long history of political engagement, and how personal attacks really don't help anybody. And they call for civility. And so they invite you and me to take a pledge. And the pledge is one of civility, to recognize the human dignity of those with whom I disagree, treat others with respect, and rise above the attacks when directed at me. So, very basic part of Catholic social teaching. Every person is worthy of human life and human dignity, right? You don't mock anybody. You don't attack the person because they have a different opinion to you. You know, I have people who say, "Oh my God, if you're a Trump supporter, you're dead in the brain. You know, how could you? Whatever." And other people who say, "If you're a Democrat, you're a baby killer." Like, you know, that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I found that specifically in my own life and how I interact in politics as a voter, I have found that the candidates that I tend to identify the most are not the ones that are going to break down their opponent and try and dismantle them publicly, but ones who really want to talk about what they plan to do and what they choose to do, what they're wanting to do for the people that they represent.
right.
There's actually, I know this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but there's a great episode of a show called Parks and Recreation. It's one of my favorite TV shows. And in one of the episodes, one of the characters is running for local office, and they have this huge debate about the commercial they're going to run, whether it's going to be an attack ad or an ad talking about policy. And that's one of the things that I want to eventually to resolve it with running this video that she made as a 10-year-old talking about how she wants to be a city councilor. And it was really cool because it shows that you don't have to be ugly to win in politics. And I think that that's something that is indicative that can happen in both sides of the aisle. We tend to try and come at one another and dismantle one another, and it's really important to remain civil. So I really like that as a first point, being civil about it.
Sure. And you know, I mean, the reason that people attack each other in politics is because they want to differentiate themselves, right? Like tonight is one of the Democrat debates, and today is the 14th of January. Okay. So lately we've been hearing things about Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and how Bernie Sanders may have said that a woman can't get elected in 2020. So where's that coming from? I don't know, and we'll see tonight if that explodes on stage. But you've got two people who are very similar, Bernie and Elizabeth. Now they have to differentiate each other from each other. And they'll find slight differences. I mean, they're just small differences or irritants. And they'll exploit them because how do you pick between the two of them? That's unfortunate, right? It doesn't build us up as a community, and it can cause long-term damage to the nation.
Absolutely.
So the second pledge is clarity. To root my political viewpoints in the gospel and a well-formed conscience, which involves prayer, conversation, study, and get this, listening. Listening. I will stand up for my convictions and speak out when I witness language that disparages others' dignity, while also listening and seeking to understand others' experiences. So a very, very important thing, first of all, is to root ourselves in the gospel. You know, when I preach at Mass, actually recently we had some guests at church and for a newcomers brunch in our parish. And we asked people, like, why do you come to Assumption? And one of the persons said, I love it that you preach about the gospel and about Jesus. And I was like, is there a trick question here? Like, what do other priests preach about? And I guess sometimes the homilies get a little political. And that's not really the place or the time or the role of the pastor. I think there is a line where we have to preach the gospel. And when the gospel tells us, you know, don't forsake the poor, the lesser, the oppressed, care for the alien in your midst, well, then we have to apply that, right? And I don't know, I can't tell you how to apply that, but I can say Jesus does say, take care of the poor, take care of the foreigner in your midst. How that's best done is left to lay people. But in that sense, you can't escape politics. But I shouldn't be saying vote for Pete in the homilies. That's not appropriate. But understanding the gospel values is important, and then standing up for our convictions about the human dignity. That's more difficult when you see that, with your friends and people are like rah rah rah.
Absolutely, and I think that becomes a real a really strong rallying point in between. That seems to be like the big tent pole on which we choose to prop up our political values is that part of the argument or that part of the discussion of the debate about the dignity and the respect for all human life. And I think the really important point that you made about that is that it is this ongoing spectrum. It's this ongoing, I don't know if you want to call it like the tapestry or whatever it is, but when we start life, we don't stop respecting life once it's life. You continue to do so, and finding the platform that supports that the best, I think, is most important. And one of the things that I really like about when it talks about clarity is asking the voter to invite prayer into their political process. We're supposed to be able to let God into everything of our lives, not just the things that we deem important. And this is one of the most important things that we do as faithful citizens, is the voting process. Are we willing to pray about the things that we're voting about? And I think that's a big part of it, because that promotes civility and helps provide clarity, inviting God into that process.
Yeah, and the other part is the listening part, right? So if I'm a Democrat and I support this, I need to watch a little bit of Fox News. I need to listen to, let's say there's a debate at the governor level or at another level between candidates that are Republican. What is really going on? What is their platform? Read their stuff, go to their websites. And the same thing, if I'm a Republican, finding out more about the Democratic candidates and saying, what do they actually believe and why do they believe that? Some very, very contentious issues like abortion, like immigration, like homeland security, the approach to the environment. Why do certain people believe in that? And I remember one of the great journalists that I really respect is Van Jones. He's a CNN journalist, and he was, and CNN tends to be pretty liberal or leaning towards the Democratic probably. But he was saying that we can't just dismiss people because they don't agree with us, and find out why do people, for example, who voted 2 times for President Obama then vote for Trump. Like, that makes no sense to some people. But then if you look underneath it, you realize, sure, it makes sense. Because people were feeling left out. People were feeling voiceless, powerless. And people, don't want to be that way. It's like the Electoral College. And people were saying, well, Hillary won by
3.5 million votes?
3.5 million votes, but she lost because of the Electoral College. Well, I kind of think it's a good thing. Maybe I'm wrong, but the Electoral College prevents smaller states, less populated states from being dismissed. It means their voices matter, right? Otherwise, California and New York could decide everything, or New York and Pennsylvania and Michigan or whatever. But I think every people need to count, and those who are smaller, less powerful, weaker in the union get a little boost of power through the Electoral College, and I think that's good. So we can't just skip over the Rust Belt. We can't skip over the Midwest. We have to be attentive to all of our citizens, and I think both parties need to be very, very attentive to that. And that's so Catholic, right? Listen to the powerless. They're important. Do you have opportunities in your family to listen to a diversity of opinions? Or
I do, and a lot of times it happens around the dinner table, with us. And I mean, even in my own home, sometimes my wife and I may disagree on things when it comes to politics. And one of the things that I've learned the most, specifically being a husband, is I have to listen. Like, I have to not try and win the argument all the time. And sometimes the way that you best, I'm not trying to constantly turn somebody or make them take my position. I need to try and better clarify my own position. And through listening, through just shutting up and hearing what people have to say, it provides me clarity on my own position, or it sometimes gives me the opportunity to change where I stand because somebody's making a good salient point about an issue. For me, specifically, because I'm originally from Arizona, the discussion revolving around immigration and asylum, what was really near and dear to my heart, because sometimes I'd be talking with friends or family members here in New York who have a very different perspective on this debate, on this discussion. And I was seeing it firsthand because I was living 30 minutes from the border, and I was interacting with people in my parish community, in my community at large, in my workspace, who were deeply affected by this whole conversation. And in coming here and living in New York, where people seem so far removed from it, it helped provide perspective for me on my own feelings and my own thoughts about this whole topic, because I'm not the only person who's experiencing this. That, believe it or not, people in New York so far removed from the border are experiencing things revolving around immigration and asylum and things like that. And I need to be mindful of that as I enter into the discussion with them. So yeah, for me, a big part of it has been shutting up. A big part of my faith lately has been shutting up, because I'm a talker, and being willing to let others communicate with me and hear that message has been really, really important.
Just a reminder that you're from Phoenix, so you don't really remember, but we also have a border up here in New York.
Right.
I have the Canadian border. So some of you may know I'm originally Canadian, still am Canadian, and a U.S. citizen as well. But, again, I've been down to the southern border and did a border experience in El Paso, went into Mexico to learn more about, and it's a very difficult circumstance, right? It's how do you balance the needs of national security, border security, and also to be the nation we were called to be in terms of as a beacon for hope and freedom for the world. But then a couple of weeks ago, volunteering at the airport, I met an ICE agent because ICE operates everywhere, and he was actually assisting with the deportation of a young woman back to her country, and we had a really good conversation about it, and the person was a convicted criminal, and she had committed many frauds and stuff, and I was like, wow, okay, we can't demonize ICE or demonize people who are involved in things that we have questions about.
Just a quick story. The best man in my wedding, my best friend from college, I've known since I was 18 years old. He is a Border Patrol agent on the southern border, and he's the guy who does exactly that. He's the one who's constantly chasing down people who are here on non-legal status who are actually criminals and they have warrants out for their arrest. Not so much dealing with the deportation of people who are just crossing the border. But at the same time, in talking with him, in the context of everything that we see in the news, for every person he has to bring in to justice and send back to their native country, he's also providing humanitarian aid for people who are, like, we see these stories where, like, we see border agents who are being so ugly to people, but at the same time, these guys who are these big, strong law enforcement types, are helping people get to safety and shelter and providing water and food and assistance, and then helping them walk through the process. It's not all just kicking in doors and grabbing bad guys and cuffing them and dragging them all over the place. It's law enforcement protecting the country, protecting our border in a safe and secure way. And sometimes we see the bad highlights of it, but he shares with me on a constant basis these stories of him interacting with people coming through our southern border and treating them humanely and fairly, but at the same time protecting the laws of our country.
Sure. I'm a very proud Canadian, but I'm also a very proud U.S. citizen. And one of the things I love about the U.S. is that the vast majority of the people in this country have such tremendous compassion and care for others. I really believe that most of our politicians are really amazing people who are trying to do amazing things with this country. And so I think having that positive outlook makes such a difference. And it's not, I don't think I'm deluding myself. I'm pretty pragmatic that way. I really see it in the day in, day out. But that brings us to our third part of the pledge, which is compassion. I pledge to encounter others with a tone and posture which affirms that I honor the dignity of others and invites others to do the same. I will presume others' best intentions and listen to their stories with empathy. I will strive to understand before seeking to be understood. How Franciscan.
Wow.
Strive to understand before being understood. And to approach people with compassion. To try to understand what's going on. And not just to think of myself. You know, like a lot of these debates, people are like, you know, why should we have healthcare for all? I'm fine, I have insurance, I'm good. Okay, but you're not the only one, right? Or why should I, you know, students sometimes talk about, you know, why should I have to pay for my premiums? I don't need the hospital. Well, right now you don't,
Right.
but at some point. But on the other hand, you know, when you're a small business owner and you see taxes keep going up, and the bureaucracy that's involved in small businesses, and here in Syracuse, we know that there's a lot of red tape with trying to do stuff in the city of Syracuse. Sometimes you got to feel for business owners, and you can understand what people are saying. You got to simplify the tax code, simplify bureaucracy, deregulate as much as possible. You can understand why people feel that way. I'm not saying it's necessarily the case, but trying to walk a little bit in another person's shoes is really, really important.
Mm-hmm. I like that, seeking not so much to be understood as to understand others. Mm-hmm. I think that that's a really important part of it. And that goes back, you know, treating others with compassion. You know, we're dealing with other human beings along this process. And human beings are imperfect. The conversations that we have are going to be imperfect conversations. We're going to be dealing with imperfect people whose viewpoints may be skewed in a way that we can't possibly understand. You know, when we're talking, you gave a great example talking about two-time Barack Obama voters then swinging so far to the opposite side of the spectrum and voting for President Trump because they feel like their voices aren't heard. And that's really what compassion comes down to, is giving people the opportunity to have their voices heard. I think that's a really important part of it. And being as compassionate as possible, that we don't leave all of the bad stuff on the table. You know, it's kind of that marriage advice, you don't go to bed angry. You know, when we have these talks, when we engage with the people in our lives about this, we don't leave it on a bad note. You know, we're willing to be civil with one another and find a place to do these kinds of conversations and live life together in a non-threatening way. You know, go have coffee, go have a beer about it. You know, don't be arguing at work about this kind of stuff. Find a place of neutrality as well, where you can be civil with one another.
For sure.
Yeah.
And not picking up and not digging in on stuff. Like, for example, you referred to Barack Obama, but you referred to President Trump.
That's a good point.
That's
a good point. Yeah.
So are you lacking in respect for President Obama?
Oh, 100% not.
So, but you know, somebody could jump in on that and say, oh, you did that, you said that. That's not helpful. That's not helpful. I mean, and there's ways you can bring that up with people, but I hear that as a pastor and as a priest with the issues of poverty. You know, people saying, "Oh, people who are poor are on social services. They're on welfare. They just take advantage of us." I saw a lady; she was using her benefits card and buying pretzels or stuff that's not necessary. And we tend to jump to conclusions very quickly, and we forget, you know. As a parish that does a lot of outreach work, we forget the struggles people have. Are there abuses? Are there things that we need to do differently? For sure. But I think just be gentle with one another in this process.
Especially when we find that we are not walking that same path as other people. You know, we have no idea whether it's a single person or a parent or a set of parents who's trying to care for a family, those benefits that the state has deemed that they're entitled to, we don't know what is going on behind the scenes. We just see the veneer of what's up front. We see somebody who we assume that it's an abuse of the benefits, and really we have no idea what that looks like. And my encouragement to people when they see those kinds of things is, instead of jumping to the conclusion, is feeling that inside of ourselves, but then taking a moment to invite God into that moment so that they don't automatically form a judgment or an opinion of that person, because that person is still entitled to the dignity and respect that every human being deserves. Just because they're not in the same socioeconomic standing as I am, I need to invite God into that experience and say, like, okay, what am I really doing here? Am I imposing my worldview onto this person, or am I really being compassionate towards my sister or my brother?
Sure. The other thing, two things I also want to talk about in this process of civilizing our debate and the political arena is the question of apathy. There is a lot of us who feel, nothing's going to change. The politicians are in charge. They're just going to, I'll be quite blunt, they're just going to screw us over anyways. Nothing's going to change.
My vote doesn't matter.
My vote doesn't matter. Well, it does. Every vote matters. And as Catholics, it's not just a suggestion. Voting is part of our religious duty to help shape a society that reflects our values. And, if you don't vote, you can't complain. I see a lot of people complain a lot, but they don't take action. And first of all, going out and voting is super important. Going out and voting in the primaries, if you're either registered for a political party or your state allows for independents to vote, go out and help shape the process. I mean, this is not magic, right? There's got to be, it's people talking to each other. That's why I like the Iowa caucuses. Sound very interesting, because it's built around conversation and dialogue as opposed to individual votes. It's important to get involved and to talk about it at the kitchen table, so that people can learn from each other and not just complain. The other thing is to be politically active. Like, if you have your opinion, like I've said, I'm kind of joking, but I am a Democrat, right? But I'm also a pro-life Democrat, which is not the most welcome group at the Democratic table.
Right.
In terms of abortion, and certainly I think the Democratic Party is very pro-life in most of the Catholic values, except the key one being the abortion debate. It's important. I believe that as a Catholic, I have to bring that to the party that I identify with. And the same thing with the Republican Party. If you're a Catholic, it's important to bring your perspective and say it can't just be about the bottom line. We also have to focus on caring for the poor. So as Catholics, we have a privileged way and a privileged basis of teaching to bring to whatever party we affiliate with.
Yeah, that's for me specifically, because I identify closer to a Republican or a conservative. I feel within the people who identify the same way that I do, I have to have more conversations about how do we treat the poor and the marginalized? How do we give compassion to the foreigner, to the immigrant, to the asylum seeker? How do we better treat fair and equitable tax reform for everybody? And how do we actually address end-of-life issues? Because surprisingly enough, within the conservative ranks, there's a big emphasis placed on the beginning of life, but not a whole lot of emphasis placed on the end of life, like care for the elderly, especially at the end of life, and especially for prisoners on death row. The church has a very firm stance about things like the death penalty, but typically conservatives tend to just be like, yeah, whatever, get rid of them. And that's not a Catholic perspective on those things. So being willing to walk in that and have those conversations and be open about those kinds of things is really important.
Yeah. The other thing I think is important in this process is also not to be blinded by one's political affiliation. And to also keep in mind the persons that you're considering to vote for. In other words, there may be times when you may be a Republican or a Democrat, and the candidate you see is from the other party, but you think, wow, she or he is really good. I don't have to vote Democrat. I don't have to vote Republican. And in fact, as somebody who's Democrat registered, I have voted for Republicans since I've become a citizen.
I have voted for Democrats.
Right. So because I thought the person was really good. Same is true here in Syracuse. Like we have an independent mayor, neither Republican nor Democrat, but affiliated and has friends in both parties. That's kind of cool, you know. That's created a fresh start for Syracuse. And I think that's what we need in this nation, I think, is that freedom just to be ourselves, to vote for the person who's the smartest, the most, has the best values, and really represents the gospel as best we can see.
Absolutely. Well, so now, Rick, we're going to put this information for Civilize It in the video, in the notes of the video, and there'll be some graphics. And we encourage you, as you are having these discussions, informing where you're going to be voting when it comes to primaries and general elections that are coming up in the next year, we invite you to read this over, look over. There's a pledge that's involved with it that you can actually take part of and make the commitment that when we're having these discussions and when we're engaging in this process, that we are using clarity, civility, and compassion. So we invite you to check that out. Also, along with that, Rick, you mentioned earlier that it was last year that you took a trip with several other Franciscans down to the U.S.-Mexico border.
It was a clergy
trip, excuse me. And you actually recorded some of your thoughts and experiences that we put in our podcast, and we're going to leave a link for that below. If you're interested in that experience that Rick had and how that kind of plays into the political process, we invite you to listen to that. I think it's 3 episodes, and none of them are particularly long. I think they're like 5-6 minutes each. Yeah. So we invite you into hearing Rick's thoughts on that. Rick, any closing thoughts for us on this issue?
No, but I do have exciting news.
Go for it.
Next month, our Tau Talks will include Bishop Douglas Lucia of Syracuse. So we're going to be talking to him about, can you hear the Canadian? We're going to be talking with him about the future of the church here in Syracuse. So get ready. I can't remember the date yet. When it's
Middle of February.
Middle of February.
And so what we invite you to do, we're so excited that we're going to have Bishop Lucia joining us here for Tau Talks. What we're going to invite you to do is on the Tau Talks page, and we're going to link that below on our website, we are going to have a feedback button. That if you have questions maybe that you wanted to ask Bishop Lucia about the diocese and his thoughts about where we're going as a community, we invite you to engage with us, with him. So please feel free to give us your feedback, not only for Bishop Lucia, but also for this episode as well. If you have questions or comments that you'd like us to address, and we're more than willing to reach out to you, feel free to visit our website at AssumptionSYR.org and engage with us there. Or our videos not only are going to be on Facebook now, but we're also uploading the entire Tau Talk series to YouTube as well. So it's easier for people to access on multiple platforms and easier for people to engage with. Leave comments in either Facebook or YouTube's comment section, and we're going to be engaging with you there. So we thank you so much for joining us. Rick, thank you so much.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. And we'll see you guys next month with Bishop Lucia on Tau Talks.
Take care. Bye.
God bless.